This is my true story. I lived 40 years believing my son died in a car crash. The police said it was quick, and I buried what they found without asking questions. I blamed fate, I blamed myself, and I learned to live with that pain. Then last week, I saw his name appear on my wife's phone, the same name I'd carved on his grave. My hands shook. My mind went blank. 40 years of grief turned into one question. Was he ever really gone? Before I tell you what I found, comment where you're watching from, and please subscribe so my story can reach more people. It happened in the summer of 1984. The day started like any other. Hot, sticky, with the sound of cicadas echoing through the fields behind our Virginia home. My son, Mark, was 17, restless, and always looking for something to do. He asked to borrow my old Ford pickup to drive down Route 29. He said he was meeting friends at the lake. I handed him the keys without thinking twice. It was just another Saturday. He was careful, responsible, the kind of boy who always came home before dark. I had no reason to worry. Around dusk, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, 2 police officers were standing there. One young, nervous, the other older, with a face that already told me everything I didn't want to know. They said there had been an accident near the highway curve just outside Culpeper. The truck had gone off the road, hit a guardrail, and caught fire. They said it burned fast. Too fast. They said they found what they believed was my son. At first, I didn't believe it. I drove out there myself, following the flashing lights and smell of burnt rubber. The pickup was unrecognizable, twisted metal, black smoke still rising from the hood. They had already taken what was left to the morgue. The officer handed me a small plastic bag. Inside were a half-burnt wallet, a melted keychain, and his class ring. That ring broke me. It was the one I'd given him for his high school graduation just a month earlier. He never took it off. The next few days were a blur. The coroner said there wasn't much to examine. The body had been too badly burned. They used dental records to confirm it was him. I didn't question it. I didn't think I could handle knowing anymore. They told me it was quick, that he didn't suffer. I remember standing there nodding, pretending that made it better. It didn't. We buried what they gave us, a closed casket. The service was small, just family and a few of his friends from school. I remember the sound of dirt hitting the coffin, that hollow thud that echoes longer than it should. My wife at the time, Carol, cried until her voice went out. I tried to be strong, but inside I felt hollow. I couldn't look at the road again for months. Every time I heard tires screeching or saw headlights curve too close to the edge, my chest tightened. After the funeral, the house went quiet. His room stayed exactly as he left it. Bed unmade, clothes piled on the chair, posters still on the wall. I'd sit in there sometimes at night, just breathing in the air that still smelled faintly of his cologne and motor oil. I couldn't bring myself to clean it. It felt like erasing him. The police ruled it an accident, said maybe a deer ran across the road, maybe the brakes failed. It didn't matter. He was gone, and all the reasons in the world couldn't fix that. Life after that felt like walking through fog. People said time heals, but time didn't heal anything. It just moved forward while I stayed stuck in that moment, watching him drive away in my mind again and again. A few weeks later, I received his final report from the insurance company. It included photos of the wreck. The truck crushed against the rail, the front end completely gone. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. There was something about seeing it that made it final. That was the day I stopped hoping he'd walk through the front door. I spent years telling myself he was gone. I built my whole life around that truth. I told everyone I'd made peace with it, but I hadn't. I just learned to live with it sitting quietly in the background. The kind of pain that doesn't scream, just hums under your skin forever. If you lose a child, you don't ever move on. You just keep breathing because your body doesn't know how to stop. That's what I did for 40 years. I thought I'd buried my son on that hillside in Virginia. I thought the story was over. But I was wrong. It was just beginning. And I didn't know it yet. After the funeral, I stopped talking for a long time. People tried to visit, bring food, say kind things. But I couldn't hear any of it. Words don't fill silence when a house loses its reason to make noise. The first few months, I still cooked enough for 2 people. I'd pour an extra cup of coffee every morning and leave it on the table, waiting for a chair that stayed empty. It took almost a year before I realized the cup always went cold. That's when it sank in. He wasn't coming back. The nights were the hardest. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 a.m., sure I'd heard boots on the porch, or the front door creaking open. Sometimes I'd even get up and walk to the hallway, expecting to see him standing there, sleepy, saying he forgot something in the truck. But every time, the hallway was empty, just shadows and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Grief plays tricks like that. It feeds you ghosts just to remind you what's gone. I kept working after that, but it wasn't the same. I worked construction, long days in the heat. My co-workers stopped asking how I was because they already knew the answer. I buried myself in routine. Wake up, work, eat, sleep. No weekends, no hobbies, no laughter. Just movement. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering. I didn't want to remember. Once a year, on the anniversary of the crash, I drove out to that stretch of Route 29. I'd park near the guardrail, bring a small bouquet of wildflowers, and sit there in my truck with the engine running. I never got out. I'd just stare at the curve where they said it happened, listening to the wind move through the trees. Sometimes I'd talk quietly, not prayers, just updates. Told him what was going on with the world, how things had changed. I told him I missed him every single day. Then I'd drive home and not speak about it to anyone. That became my ritual for almost 40 years. The house stayed the same all those years. I couldn't bring myself to sell it. I replaced the roof, the floors, the fence, but not his room. It stayed exactly how it was the day he died. The bed still made, the baseball glove still on the shelf, his name still scratched into the desk with a pocket knife. People said I should let go, pack his things, start over. But you can't pack away love. You can't throw it in a box and pretend it doesn't still breathe in the walls. For years, I carried the same photograph in my wallet. Him at 16, standing by that old Ford truck, grinning with oil on his face. The corners of the photo wore down from how often I took it out. I looked at it every day before work, like a quiet promise that I'd keep living because he couldn't. Sometimes, late at night, I'd dream he wasn't dead. In those dreams, he'd show up at the front door, older, taller, but with the same eyes. He'd say he'd been gone too long, that he was sorry. I'd wake up before I could answer. The dream never lasted past that point. It was cruel, but it was all I had. The years rolled by, and the people who remembered him started to fade too. Old friends moved away, neighbors passed on. Even my first wife, Carol, couldn't carry the pain anymore. She left one winter, saying she needed to start fresh. I didn't blame her. We both lost the same person, but carried the grief in different ways. She wanted to live. I just wanted to endure. I stopped celebrating holidays after that. Birthdays, Christmas, they didn't mean anything without him. I'd see other families laughing in stores or restaurants and have to walk away. The sound of fathers and sons talking always cut deep. I'd turn on the TV just to drown it out. The world moved on without me. I watched it through a window like someone who didn't belong in it anymore. Then one day, 10 years later, I met a woman named Linda at a diner in Missouri. She smiled at me like she saw through all the silence. I didn't know it then, but that simple smile would lead me into another kind of pain I never saw coming. It was the summer of 1994 when I met Linda. I was 50 then, working maintenance jobs in Missouri after selling what was left of my business in Virginia. I'd stopped talking about my past. People don't know what to say when you tell them you buried your child. They just go quiet, and you end up comforting them instead. So I kept my story to myself. One afternoon, I stopped at a small diner off the highway for coffee. The waitress brought it with a smile and said, "You look like you've had a long day." That was Linda. I didn't know it yet, but that small moment would change everything. She was friendly, quick to laugh, with that kind of warmth that makes you forget time. I started stopping by the diner every week. We'd talk about simple things, the weather, the town, her garden. She never asked about my past, and I was grateful for that. After a few months, she invited me over for dinner. I remember sitting at her kitchen table, hearing the radio play soft country songs while she cooked. It felt normal. I hadn't felt normal in a long time. Over time, we grew close. I told her about my son, but only once. I didn't go into detail. I just said he died young and that I never really recovered. She reached across the table and held my hand. She said, "You can't live your whole life in the past." Her words were simple, but they stuck with me. She wasn't cruel or impatient. She just wanted me to live again. We married a year later in a small courthouse ceremony. No family, no guests, just us and the clerk. I sold my house in Virginia and moved into hers, a modest two-bedroom place near Springfield. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something again. We spent quiet evenings watching TV, cooking dinner, and sitting on the porch talking about the little things in life. I thought maybe, finally, the years of pain were behind me. Linda never had children of her own, and she treated me kindly. She said I deserved peace. She encouraged me to visit the cemetery less often, to stop reopening the wound. "He wouldn't want you to live in pain," she'd say, and she was probably right. For a long time, I listened. I didn't visit the grave for nearly 5 years. I started to feel like I was healing, not forgetting, but learning how to carry it differently. We grew older together, and life became simple again. Sundays meant pancakes and grocery shopping. Summers meant barbecues with neighbors. It wasn't exciting, but it was calm. I thought that was enough. We had our share of small arguments like every couple, but never anything serious. I trusted her, completely. Whenever she talked about the past, she'd mention living in different towns, Oklahoma, Kentucky, and once a small town in Virginia. I never thought much of it. She said she worked as a nurse's aide and moved around for jobs. It made sense. I didn't know she'd ever been anywhere near where I'd lost my son. Looking back, there were small signs, the way she sometimes changed the subject when I talked about him, or how she avoided looking at the photos I kept of him on the mantel. I figured it was just her way of helping me move on. I didn't think she was hiding anything. By the time we'd been married nearly 30 years, our lives had settled into quiet routine. She'd go shopping on Thursdays, clean the house on weekends, and spend evenings scrolling through her phone, showing me funny videos or recipes. We never kept secrets. At least, that's what I believed. I thought I'd finally found peace. I thought the pain of losing my son had faded into memory. But that illusion shattered one ordinary afternoon in our kitchen, when her phone buzzed, and I saw a name I never expected to see again. It was a quiet afternoon. Linda had gone out to pick up groceries earlier that morning, and I was fixing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and the radio was playing low in the background. Her phone was sitting on the counter next to the fruit bowl, buzzing every few minutes. Normally, I never touched it. After 30 years of marriage, there was no reason to snoop. We trusted each other. But that day, something different happened. The screen lit up, and a message preview appeared before it locked again. It said, "Call me, Linda. Mark." For a second, I froze. My first thought was that it was a coincidence. Mark was a common name, but my stomach tightened anyway. I reached over to check the time on her phone. At least, that's what I told myself. But curiosity got the better of me. When I picked it up, the message was still on the screen. The words didn't look random. It wasn't a group chat or spam or anything that made sense. It was personal. I pressed the home button and the screen opened without a password. She'd never hidden anything before. I tapped on the Messages app, my hands shaking more with each second. The top thread was labeled simply, Mark. I opened it. The chat history went back months. Dozens of messages, long conversations, calls, pictures, even voice notes. My eyes scanned through, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The tone wasn't romantic. It wasn't flirtatious or strange, but it was intimate. Like two people who shared something deep, something secret. One message caught my eye. "I can't tell him yet. He's not ready." Another said, "He deserves the truth someday, but not from me." My chest went cold. The more I scrolled, the clearer it became that they weren't talking about work or family or anything ordinary. They were talking about me. At first, I thought maybe she'd reconnected with one of my old friends. I had known a few guys named Mark back in the day. But then I saw a photo thumbnail in one of the older messages. My thumb hesitated before I tapped it open. It was a picture of a man, maybe in his 50s, sitting outside a small diner. He had gray hair, a beard, and a face that looked tired but familiar. Too familiar. My stomach dropped. His eyes, they were mine. The same shape, the same expression. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I dropped the phone on the counter and backed away. I just stood there staring at it, waiting for it to make sense. It didn't. The man in that photo looked exactly like my son would have looked if he'd lived. The same jawline, the same crooked smile. I picked the phone back up and read the most recent messages again, slower this time. "I'll see you next week." He still doesn't know. It's time. That last one hit hardest. It's time. Time for what? To tell me? To confess? To introduce me to a ghost I buried 40 years ago? I put the phone down and walked to the sink. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the counter just to steady myself. I felt sick, not just from fear, but from betrayal. If this was real, if what I was thinking was even possible, it meant my wife had been talking to my son behind my back for years, and she'd let me believe he was dead the whole time. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at that phone, watching it light up again every few minutes with new notifications. I didn't open any more messages. I couldn't. My heart was pounding too hard to think clearly. When I finally heard her car pull into the driveway, I put the phone back exactly where it was. I didn't say a word when she came inside. She smiled, asked how my day was, unpacked the groceries like nothing was wrong. But inside, something had already broken. I kept quiet through dinner, pretending everything was normal. She didn't notice the way I watched her. I waited until she went to bed before I picked up her phone again and stared at that name one more time. Mark. The same name carved on a tombstone 40 years ago. The same name I whispered every night before I slept. My son's name. And that's when I knew, whatever story I thought I'd lived was a lie. And the truth was sitting a few taps away on that phone. I barely slept that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning in circles. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that name again. Mark. It didn't matter how many times I told myself it could be someone else. My gut said otherwise. I turned over, looked at Linda sleeping beside me, peaceful, unaware. I wanted to wake her up, to ask her what this meant, but I couldn't find the strength. My heart was pounding so loud it drowned out every thought. The next morning, I waited until she left for her usual Sunday errands. The second the door shut, I grabbed her phone from the counter again. My hands were shaking, but I didn't care. I opened her contacts, scrolled down, and found the name. Mark. No last name, no description, no photo. Just a phone number and dozens of recent calls. The log went back at least 6 months, maybe more. The last one was from the night before, 27 minutes long. I felt my throat tighten. I opened their messages again, reading slowly this time, forcing myself to look at every word. "I'm proud of you for staying calm. You don't have to rush it. He'll understand someday. Don't blame yourself for what happened." Every message made my stomach twist tighter. It sounded like she was comforting him, not hiding him, like she cared about him. That realization cut deep, because it meant she knew him personally. I tried to think of explanations. Maybe it was another Mark, maybe someone from her side of the family. But the timeline didn't fit. I remembered how a few years back, she'd suddenly started making solo trips to visit her cousin in Arkansas. She said she needed to help with family matters. I never questioned it. Now, I wasn't so sure. Those trips lined up perfectly with the earliest dates in the message thread. I sat at the table, phone in my hand, heart pounding, trying to breathe. The house felt different, too quiet, too heavy. It was the same silence I'd lived in after losing my son. Only this time, it wasn't grief that filled it. It was confusion and fear. Because if what I suspected was true, then I'd spent 40 years grieving a boy who never died, and living with a woman who knew. I went into the den and opened the small wooden box where I kept the few things from his old life: his class ring, his driver's license, the police report, the obituary clipped from the local paper. I spread them across the table and stared at them. The report said the fire was so bad they could only identify the body through dental records. But I remembered something strange from that day. The coroner had told me there wasn't much left to test. How could they have been so sure? How could I have been so willing to believe it? The thought that he might still be alive made me dizzy. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or betrayed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the phone and call that number right then, demand to know who was on the other end. But something stopped me. What if it was him? What would I even say? What if he didn't want to hear from me? Or worse, what if he didn't remember me at all? I sat there for hours, just staring at the phone screen, the contact name glowing up at me like a ghost. I opened the call log one more time and copied the number onto a piece of paper. Then I put the phone back exactly where it was. I didn't want her to know I'd seen anything yet. I needed time to think. When Linda came home later that afternoon, I watched her closely. Every move she made, every word she said. She acted completely normal, humming while putting away groceries, asking if I wanted tea. I nodded, pretending everything was fine, but inside I was falling apart. That night, I sat outside on the porch with the slip of paper in my hand. I looked at the number over and over. My thumb hovered over the keypad of my old flip phone, ready to call. But I couldn't do it. Not yet. My heart wasn't ready for what might come next, because the truth scared me more than death ever did. If my son was alive, then who had I buried 40 years ago? That night, I couldn't take the silence anymore. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to say something. I sat in my chair, pretending to watch television, but my mind was locked on that name. Mark. I kept glancing at Linda as she flipped through a magazine, calm as ever. It was unbearable. Finally, I spoke. My voice came out lower than I expected. I asked her, plain and simple, "Who is Mark?" She froze. The magazine slipped from her hands. For a long time, she didn't say a word. Her face went pale, her lips trembling slightly. Then she whispered, "Please, don't do this." That one sentence told me everything I needed to know. There was no confusion in her eyes, no surprise, just guilt. I could feel it in the air, the same way you feel a storm coming before it breaks. I leaned forward, keeping my tone steady. I told her I saw the messages, the calls, everything. I asked her again who he was. She looked down at the floor, and when she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet I could barely hear it. She said, "He's your son." My heart stopped. I stared at her, waiting for her to say it was a mistake, a bad joke, anything, but she didn't. She said his name again. Mark. The same name carved into a tombstone in Virginia 40 years ago. I felt the room tilt. My ears rang. For a moment, I thought I might pass out. She told me she met him years ago, completely by accident. She said she didn't know who he was at first. He was going by a different name, living in another state, working small jobs. But when she found out his real name, she recognized it from the stories I'd told her about the accident. She said she didn't tell me because he made her promise not to. I asked her why. She said my son didn't die in that crash. He survived, but he didn't want me to know. He was young, scared, and ashamed. He thought he'd ruined everything, and when the truck crashed, he panicked and ran. By the time the authorities arrived, someone else had been in the wreck, a hitchhiker, maybe, or a stranger who took a ride with him that night. They assumed it was him because of the wallet and the ring. He never corrected them. He disappeared instead. I could barely breathe. I wanted to believe it, but I couldn't. It sounded impossible, like something out of a bad story. But Linda swore it was true. She said she'd been in contact with him for years, keeping his secret because he wasn't ready to face me. She said he carried too much guilt for letting me think he was dead. Every word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. For 40 years, I'd mourned him. I'd sat by his grave every year. I'd built my whole life around that pain. And now I was being told it was all built on a lie. I felt angry, broken, betrayed, but beneath it all was something worse, hope, the kind of hope that hurts more than grief. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to understand. I asked her where he was now. She said she didn't know exactly, that he moved often, never staying in one place long. But he still called her, still checked in. That meant he was alive. Alive, somewhere out there, talking to my wife instead of me. She reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. I didn't know what to feel. I should have been grateful. My son was alive. But all I could think about was the years I'd lost, the nights I cried myself to sleep, the life I lived without him, and the fact that she'd known all along, sitting across from me at the dinner table, pretending everything was normal. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just sat back down and stared at the wall until she stopped talking. My whole world had shifted, and I didn't even know which way was up anymore. That night, I didn't go to bed. I sat in the living room with the light off, holding that slip of paper with his number on it. The truth was out now, but it didn't feel like a relief. It felt like another wound, deeper than the first. My son wasn't dead, but the life I'd lived believing he was. That part was. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table before sunrise, staring at the steam rising from my coffee. Linda came downstairs, her eyes red and tired. She didn't say much, just stood there quietly, like someone waiting for a verdict. I told her to sit. I said I wanted to hear everything from the beginning. No half-truths, no skipping parts. I needed to know what happened 40 years ago, every detail she knew. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then she began to tell me the story I never got to hear. She said my son didn't die in that crash. The accident happened, but it wasn't fatal, at least not for him. The truck had gone off the road, hit the guardrail, and rolled into a ditch. The fire started in the front, not the cab. When the truck caught, he crawled out through the passenger side, bleeding, dazed, terrified. But he wasn't alone. There had been another boy with him, a hitchhiker he'd picked up outside of town. She said no one ever knew that part because it was never in the police report. The other boy didn't make it. The fire spread too quickly. My son tried to help him but panicked when the flames reached the fuel line. He ran into the woods, burned and disoriented. He thought he'd go back when it was over, but by the time he found his way to the road again, the police and ambulance were already there. He stood at a distance, watching as they pulled the wreckage apart. When he heard the officers say there was a body inside, he froze. They assumed it was him because they found his wallet and ring. The truth was, he'd taken off his ring earlier that day while working on the truck and left it on the dash. She said he wanted to come home, but fear took over. He thought he'd be blamed for the other boy's death, maybe even arrested. He didn't know how to explain surviving a crash that burned that bad. So he left. He walked for days before catching a ride out of state. The papers called it a fatal accident. No one questioned it. And by the time the funeral happened, he was hundreds of miles away under a new name. Linda told me she met him years later, completely by chance. She'd been working at a small medical clinic in Arkansas in the early 90s. He came in with a minor injury, a deep cut on his hand from construction work. When he gave his name, she said it felt familiar. Later, she asked him about it, and when he mentioned growing up near Route 29, everything clicked. She didn't tell him who she was married to right away. But after a few visits, she did. She said he turned white as a sheet and walked out of the clinic without another word. A week later, he came back. He told her the truth, how he'd survived, how he'd run, how the guilt ate him alive for years. He said he wanted to reach out to me but couldn't. He thought too much time had passed. He said he built a small life, nothing fancy, just enough to get by. Worked construction jobs, lived in motels, no family, no roots. He said he didn't deserve to come home after what he'd done. I listened, my heart breaking with every word. I could picture him, older now, weathered by guilt and years of running. I asked her how long she'd known. She said almost 15 years. She swore she wanted to tell me, but every time she tried, he begged her not to. He said it would destroy me to learn I'd grieved for nothing. He said he wasn't the son I remembered, that I'd be disappointed if I saw him now. I sat there speechless. My mind was full of noise, memories, anger, relief, confusion. Part of me wanted to drive straight to wherever he was, grab him by the shoulders, and tell him he was wrong. But another part of me couldn't move. I was terrified. Terrified of what I'd find if I did. Linda reached for my hand again. I didn't pull away this time. I just stared at the table. My son, the boy I'd buried, mourned, and talked to at a grave for 40 years, had been alive all along, living a few states away, watching from a distance, hiding from the one man who never stopped loving him. I didn't know if I wanted to see him or if I even could, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living without knowing the rest. I had to find him. Whether it healed me or broke me for good, I needed the truth. For days after that conversation, I couldn't eat, sleep, or think straight. Every sound in the house reminded me of the years I'd spent believing my son was dead. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the soft footsteps of my wife. All of it sounded wrong now, like a life built on someone else's story. I'd been betrayed, not just by her, but by fate, by time, by my own willingness to accept what I was told. But under all the anger, there was something else I hadn't felt in 40 years. Hope. I tried to hate her. I really did. I told myself that keeping a secret like that for so long was unforgivable. But then I'd think about the reason she gave, that my son didn't want me to know, that he was ashamed, scared, convinced he'd ruined my life. And I understood that kind of fear. When you lose something that precious, you start to believe you're not meant to have it back. I'd done that too. Buried my hope, sealed it inside the same coffin I thought held my son. One afternoon, I drove to the old crash site. It hadn't changed much. The guardrail was new, the grass had grown over, but the place still felt heavy with memory. I stood there and tried to picture that night again. The headlights cutting through the dark, the sound of metal and fire. But this time, I imagined him crawling out, gasping for breath, running into the woods, terrified and alive. I thought of how close he must have been, hiding just beyond the tree line, watching the same flashing lights that broke me for decades. It made my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. That night, I asked Linda again when she last heard from him. She said it had been 2 weeks ago. He'd told her he might be moving farther west, maybe to Colorado. He didn't say why. She said he still didn't want to talk to me, not because he hated me, but because he didn't know how to face me after all these years. He thought I'd be angry. He thought I'd hate him. I laughed when she said that, not out of joy, but out of disbelief. Angry? I'd have given anything to hear his voice once more, even if it was just to tell me he was sorry. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. The hole that grief left was still there, but now it had a faint pulse of light in it. My son was alive. That thought alone carried a strange kind of comfort, even if it came with pain. I'd spent so long talking to a gravestone, asking questions that would never be answered, that I forgot what it felt like to have something to search for. Now I had a reason to keep moving again. Still, I couldn't ignore what Linda had done. Every time I looked at her, I saw the years she'd chosen to stay quiet. Every Christmas, every birthday, every night I cried thinking about my boy. She was there, holding the truth like a secret between her palms. I wanted to scream at her, but I couldn't, because deep down I knew that if I'd been in her place, maybe I'd have done the same. She wasn't protecting herself. She was protecting me. Or at least she thought she was. I spent the next few days in the garage, looking through boxes of old photos and papers. His birth certificate, school awards, drawings he made when he was little. I hadn't opened those boxes in years. I wanted to remember who he was before all of this, before the fear, before the lies. I wanted to see my son again, even if it was only through the faded ink and paper he left behind. And as I sat there, surrounded by memories and dust, I realized something that nearly broke me all over again. I didn't need to know why he ran anymore. I just needed to know where he was, because as long as he was still out there, breathing under the same sky, I still had time. Time to forgive, time to speak, Time to make things right. I didn't know if I'd ever find him. I didn't know if he'd even want to be found. But for the first time in 40 years, I wanted to try. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. I sat by the window with my coffee, staring at the yard that once echoed with my son's laughter. The grass had turned yellow with fall. The wooden fence leaned a little more each year. But if I closed my eyes, I could still see him there. A boy with messy hair, a baseball glove too big for his hand, and a smile that could light up a bad day. That memory used to break me. Now, it kept me breathing. I remembered the first time I taught him how to throw a baseball. He couldn't have been more than 7. We were in the backyard, the sun barely up, the dew still fresh on the grass. I showed him how to hold the ball, how to plant his feet, how to follow through. He missed the first dozen throws, but when he finally got it right, he jumped like he just won a championship. I can still hear him laughing, that wild, pure sound that comes from a kid who doesn't yet know what loss feels like. Then there was the fishing trip to Lake Anna. He must have been 12 then. He woke me up at 4 a.m., already wearing his hat backward, carrying the tackle box like it was treasure. We sat on the dock for hours without catching a single fish, but he never complained. He just kept asking questions about everything. Why the water was still, why the sky changed colors, why fish even bit hooks if it hurt them. He had a curious mind, always searching for answers. That was his nature. To wonder, to ask, to dream. As I sat there remembering, I realized how much I'd lost. Not just him, but the life we were supposed to have. All the birthdays that never happened, the graduation I never saw, the wedding I never attended, the grandkids I never met. 40 years is a long time for memories to turn into ghosts, and mine had been haunting me quietly all this time. I'd built my whole world around the idea that he was gone, and now I had to rebuild it again. This time around, the possibility that he was alive. I went to the attic that afternoon and opened a box I hadn't touched since the 90s. Inside were his things, a few toys, a baseball, some letters, and a faded photo of him in his high school jacket. I picked it up and stared at it for a long time. His eyes were my eyes, same shape, same look of quiet determination. It hit me that if he was alive, he'd be a man in his late 50s now. I tried to picture him that way. Wrinkles, gray hair, older, maybe tired. But no matter how hard I tried, all I could see was that same 17-year-old boy waving from behind the wheel of the truck on the morning he left. Linda came upstairs while I was still holding the photo. She didn't say a word. She just stood there watching me, her face full of regret. I didn't have the strength to fight anymore. I told her I was going to find him. She didn't try to stop me. She just nodded. I think she knew there was no turning back now. That night, I sat by the old rotary phone on the kitchen counter and stared at the number she'd written down, the one labeled Mark. My hands shook as I picked it up. I dialed 3 digits before hanging up. I couldn't do it, not yet. Because what if he answered? What if he didn't? What if he'd moved on completely, with a new life, new people, and no room left for the father he abandoned? I wasn't sure I could handle hearing his voice after 40 years, not knowing whether he still loved me or even remembered me. So I did what I'd always done. I sat in silence, holding the phone, and talked to him in my head instead. I told him I forgave him. I told him I never stopped waiting. I told him that no matter what happened, he was still my boy. Maybe someday I'll have the courage to say those words out loud, to him, not just to the empty air. For now, all I have are memories. But those memories, after all this time, feel more alive than ever. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to lead me to him again. It has been 1 week since I saw that name on Linda's phone. I haven't called it yet. Every night I walk past the piece of paper on the counter where I wrote down the number, and every time my hand hesitates. I tell myself I'll do it tomorrow, but tomorrow keeps turning into another day of silence. I think part of me is afraid of the answer. After 40 years of believing my son was gone, hearing his voice again could either save me or destroy me completely. Still, I know one thing for sure. I can't die without trying. I sit by the porch every evening. the same porch where I used to wait for him to come home from school. The air feels different now. The world outside keeps moving. Kids ride bikes, dogs bark, the mail truck hums by, but my heart feels like it's been frozen in time since 1984. Sometimes I close my eyes and pretend he's still a boy running up the driveway with a baseball in his hand, shouting for me to come play. Then I open my eyes and see nothing but an empty road. 40 years. That's a lifetime to lose someone who was supposed to outlive you. Linda stays quiet these days. She moves through the house carefully, like every step might break the floor beneath her. I know she's sorry. I can see it in her eyes, but sorry doesn't change the past. I don't yell. I don't curse. I just stay quiet. There's no point in punishing her. The truth already did that for both of us. Sometimes I wonder if she regrets telling me. Maybe she wishes she'd kept the secret until the day I died. But deep down, I'm glad she didn't. Because even though it broke me, it also gave me something I haven't had in 4 decades, a reason to believe again. I think about what kind of man my son might be now. Is he married? Does he have children? Does he ever think of me when he sees an old Ford truck on the road? I wonder if he still remembers the smell of the lake water or the sound of my voice calling him for dinner. I wonder if he ever tried to find me but lost the nerve. The world's big, but not big enough to hide from your own blood forever. Maybe he's been keeping track from a distance, waiting for the right time. Or maybe he's still too afraid to come home. Some nights I take out that letter from the sheriff's office, the one that confirmed his death all those years ago. I read it again, slowly, word by word. It says presumed deceased, not confirmed. I never noticed that before. It's strange how 4 decades can pass before one word changes everything. I think that word was trying to tell me something back then, that maybe I should have looked harder, asked more questions. But grief blinds you. When the world says your son is gone, you stop arguing. You just accept it because the pain is easier than the doubt. If I could speak to him now, I wouldn't ask where he's been or why he left. I'd just tell him the truth. I never stopped being his father. I never stopped thinking about him every morning I woke up and every night I went to bed. I never stopped setting an extra plate at Christmas, even when Linda said it hurt too much to see. I never stopped believing that somewhere out there, the boy who once called me Dad was still alive. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. Maybe one day the phone will ring and I'll hear his voice. Maybe one day he'll knock on this same door, gray-haired and tired, and I'll finally get to look him in the eyes again. Or maybe none of that will happen. Maybe this story ends with an unanswered call and a number that goes silent forever. Either way, at least I'll know I tried. I used to believe my son died in a fire. Now I believe he's living in one, a fire of guilt, shame, and lost time. But fire can destroy, or it can light the way home. I just hope he finds the courage to walk toward the light this time, because no matter how long it's been, no matter how far he's gone, he's still my son, and I'm still waiting. 40 years I grieved for a ghost. Now I wait for a man who might still call me Dad.